Hallo, kann man mich gut verstehen? Schön, dass ihr alle so zahlreich erschienen seid zu diesem doch etwas, vielleicht sagen wir, schwermütigen Anlass. Mein Name ist Konstantin Nowotny, ich arbeite bei der taz, ich bin unter anderem auch Autor bei der taz und ansonsten für allerlei andere Sachen zuständig, unter anderem für diese Veranstaltung hier heute. Wir sprechen heute über den 7. Oktober, der heute ist, der Jahrestag des Angriffs der Hamas auf Israel, vor genau einem Jahr. Ich habe mir einen Ablaufplan überlegt, ihr könnt gerne widersprechen. Ich habe mich jetzt gerade erstmal selbst vorgestellt, dann werde ich kurz vielleicht 3 Minuten einen Text vorlesen, um vielleicht jeden hier inklusive mich selbst noch einmal abzuholen. Worum geht es, was ist passiert und worüber werden wir jetzt die nächste vielleicht Stunde sprechen. Danach stelle ich meine beiden Talkgäste Würdemann und Hamza Howidy nochmal richtig vor und den Rest der Veranstaltung. Und jetzt schaue ich noch mal ein bisschen aufmerksam ins Publikum, werde ich dann den Talk auf Englisch führen. Für wen hier, also sagen wir mal so, für wen hier wäre das absolut gar kein Problem? Okay, ich sehe ein paar Hände, die unten geblieben sind. Das ist in Ordnung. Ich wusste nicht genau, wie gut wir das kommuniziert haben. Das funktioniert aber insbesondere mit Hamza natürlich nicht anders. Vielleicht, ich versuche es irgendwie so hinzukriegen, dass wir ein bisschen sprechen und ich zwischendurch immer, wenn ich einen Frageblock durch habe, vielleicht auf Deutsch etwas ein bisschen zusammenfasse. Das ist ja auch für diejenigen, die des Englischen mächtig sind, hier im Saal vielleicht gar nicht so schlecht und für mich selber vielleicht auch nicht. Aber jetzt erstmal ganz kurz, wir sprechen heute über den 7. Oktober. Am 7. Oktober 2023, heute vor einem Jahr, wachten Israelis in einer anderen Welt auf. Israelis und Palästinenserinnen. Gewalt waren und sind sie gewohnt im Nahen Osten seit Jahrzehnten. Der schwarze Sabbat, wie die israelischen Medien den Samstag vor einem Jahr unterdessen nennen, war aber anders im Hinblick auf die Methode der Gewalt, ihre Quantität und ihre Folgen. Nachdem am Morgen bereits tausende Raketen vom Gazastreifen auf Israel niedergegangen sind, überwanden etwa 6.000 Menschen den eigentlich schwer bewachten Grenzzaun zwischen dem israelischen Staatsgebiet und dem abgeriegelten Gazastreifen. Mindestens 3.800 von ihnen gehörten zu bewaffneten Kommandos der Hamas. Ihr Ziel waren vor allem die grenznahen Kibbuzim, kleine, oft landwirtschaftlich geprägte Siedlungen in Israel. Dort drangen Terroristen ein, erschossen wahllos Menschen, folterten viele, setzten Häuser an Brand und nahmen Geiseln. Ein Musikfestival, das im Morgengrauen noch nahe des Grenzstreifens stattfand, wurde von Bewaffneten auf Gleitschirmen entdeckt und spontan niedergemetzelt. Allein hier starben über 300 Menschen. Es dauert Stunden, ehe die Einsatzkräfte der israelischen Armee das volle Ausmaß des Angriffs begreifen. Überstürzt greifen sie ein, da ließ sich das Schlimmste aber schon kaum mehr verhindern. Viele Israelis wachen an diesem Morgen auf und finden auf ihrem Handy Videos von Hinrichtungen ihrer Freunde und Verwandten. Die Terroristen wollen Unheil und Panik verbreiten, wollten die israelische Gesellschaft, die zu diesem Zeitpunkt ohnehin seit Monaten politisch zerrissen war, an ihrer empfindlichsten Stelle treffen, ihrem Sicherheitsbedürfnis. Im Laufe des 7. Oktober 2023 sterben etwa 1.200 Israelis, die meisten von ihnen Zivilisten. 240 von ihnen werden als Geisel nach Gaza verschleppt, etwa 100 davon befinden sich mutmaßlich immer noch dort, die restlichen Geiseln konnten entkommen, wurden befreit oder sind tot. Nach dem 7. Oktober 2023 hörte das Sterben im Nahen Osten nicht auf. Es dauerte nur Stunden, bis die ersten hochrangigen Politiker Israels von einer beispiellosen Vergeltung sprachen. Diese traf und trifft seitdem vor allem die Zivilbevölkerung und die zivile Infrastruktur in Gaza. Im Großraum Gaza leben knapp 1,8 Millionen Menschen. Die Region gilt als eine der am dichtesten besiedelten der Welt. 40.000 Menschen starben seit Beginn dieses neuerlichen Krieges, viele davon Kinder. Zwar gelang es den israelischen Streitkräften, wichtige Führer der Hamas und anderer Terrororganisationen im Rahmen ihrer Militäroffensive auszuschalten und einige Geiseln zu befreien. Allerdings sind weite Teile des Gazastreifens nun unbewohnbar und Hunderttausende Menschen auf der Flucht, obdachlos, erkrankt oder an Hunger leidend. Es gäbe jetzt noch sehr viel zu erzählen über das, was seit dem 7. Oktober passiert ist. Aber das diskutieren wir dann hier mit unseren Gästen. Ich werde die beiden, das habe ich schon gesagt, ich werde die beiden einmal vorstellen und dann geht es, wie gesagt, auf Englisch weiter und wir gucken, wie gut ich das hinkriege. Zu meiner Rechten sitzt Hamza Howidy. Er kommt aus Gaza, studierte dort an der Islamischen Universität Accounting. 2019 nahm er zum ersten Mal an den sogenannten We Want to Live-Protesten im Gazastreifen teil. Darüber reden wir, glaube ich, gleich noch ein bisschen. Die Proteste machten sich für eine Verbesserung der Lebensbedingungen in Gaza stark. Im Juni 2023 protestierte er erneut und wurde festgenommen. Kurz vor dem 7. Oktober verließ er dann Gaza, flüchtete über Umwege nach Deutschland und setzt sich hier seitdem für einen Frieden zwischen Israelis und Palästinenserinnen ein. Noch weiter rechts neben mir sitzt Tom Würdemann. Tom ist Historiker und Nahost-Wissenschaftler. Er promoviert derzeit an der Hochschule für jüdische Studien Heidelberg im DFG-Graduiertenkolleg Ambivalente Feindschaft und leistet nebenher Bildungsarbeit gegen Rassismus, Antisemitismus und Extremismus. Stimmt das, Tom? All right, Hamza, you're now part of the conversation. It's very hard for me to start easy on a subject like October 7, so I'll try this. Do you remember where you were on October 7 last year, and what maybe were your initial thoughts when you heard about what happened?
Yes, first I would thank you for having me today. And for the October the 7th, I remember that back then I was in Greece, and I was shocked when I heard about the news as anyone. And even the shock is a simple word to describe the feeling that came to my mind when I saw the atrocities that Hamas committed on that day, the shame I felt when I saw some group of Gazans or Hamas supporters celebrating these atrocities. And on the other side, I felt afraid, terrified, because of our experience with Israel and the military operations between Hamas and Israel. I knew that there would be a high hit back by Israel. They are going to retaliate, and back in 2007, when Hamas kidnapped a single Israeli soldier, there was a war that killed more than 3,000 Palestinians. So when I hear that there is more than 200 hostages, I knew that this might mean a disaster for the Gaza Strip.
Tom, same question to you. You've been closely monitoring this conflict for many years. What were your first thoughts when you first heard about Hamas attack? Did you feel like any of this came unexpected to you?
Yes, it was really unexpected at that moment. It was, of course, also what nobody expected. I started tweeting about what was happening rather frantically, like very in fast succession. And immediately started to see, because many people on social media were asking, what is happening? Mm-hmm. So I immediately tried to find some words or some interpretations about what was still going on in order to answer those questions by other people. What is happening? Yeah.
Hamza, before we get further into what happened since, maybe let's dial back a bit. You already mentioned 2007. I already mentioned you participating in the We Want to Live protest when I introduced you. Tell me again, why and how did you leave Gaza?
To be honest, I've never thought of leaving the Gaza Strip because my family, my friends, and everyone, all my life is there, and I love my country. Unfortunately, when I was supposed to graduate from the university in Gaza, because of the economical situation in Gaza and the gap that Hamas made between the people and their supporters, it was hard for me to get a normal life in Gaza without being a Hamas member or a supporter somehow. So I participated in the We Want to Live protest in 2019 and in 2023 in June, a few months before the war. But the reason that made me decide to leave the Gaza Strip is that when I was arrested in the 2 times, unfortunately, there was no media coverage for what's happening in the Gaza Strip. As long as the problem is somehow Palestinian, no one cares. But when Israel involves, everyone wants to hear. In 2019 and in 2023, there was no media coverage. Even Al Jazeera, who have tons of journalists in the Gaza Strip did not report anything about the protest. In fact, they were reporting how is the weather in Palestine. And the second problem is that the human rights organizations never thought about us or even said a single word. So that made me lose hope of making any change of the Strip. That's why I decided to leave.
Are you in contact with friends and family over in Gaza right now? And can you tell us maybe a little bit more about the situation there right now?
Yes, I do. Thankfully, I managed to evacuate my immediate family before the Rafah operation. But I do still have many friends and family extended members in the Gaza Strip. And I can't think of any suitable word to describe how awful the situation is in the Gaza Strip. We are talking about a mass destruction of more than 70% of the Gaza Strip. So you can imagine all the strip turned to ruins, and there is a tough situation where there is lack of the medical infrastructure, and there is more than 80,000 people wounded. There is a lack of the food and the drinking water. Also for the other stuff. The people still suffer, whether that was from Hamas or the IDF's bombardment.
Tom, Hamza just told us a little bit about the political situation in Gaza, and Hamas is ruling there since 2007, and I think it's fair to say that they increasingly became more authoritarian, and there have not been elections in Gaza since, 17 years? And maybe can you tell us a little bit more about Hamas' enemyship towards Israel and why these tactics worked in Gaza for so long? And you are, of course, invited to add.
The eminent Middle East scientist Bassam Tibi wrote already over 30 years, or around 30 years ago, that Hamas might take over Gaza at some point, which I think is an incredible feat, given that at that time there was not even a Palestinian autonomy government. That was shortly before. He already made that prophecy. Gaza is the area of Palestinian territories where there's the largest concentration of inhabitants. It is also very poor. It has hardly any natural resources. It has been, and it must be, because of the nature of the territory, mostly independent on import of most necessary materials, and it never has been able and been allowed to develop an independent economy. That makes Gaza the obvious place where the most radicalization happens on the Palestinian side, except maybe the refugee camps of Lebanon, who are in an even worse situation and who are also firmly in the hand of Hamas. Yeah? Then what we add in Hamas, what we have are basically two things coming together. One, the rejectionist strain in Palestinian nationalism that says we fight with Israel, we fight for the land that is ours, that is not the Jews, not the Zionists' land, we will liberate all of our land. This is a tradition that is in Palestinian nationalism that is older than Hamas, which we can, for example, see that we see some Palestinian leftists, Maoists, like Munir Shafiq, who join Hamas later, yeah, who had been communists before, but because they were very firm about their rejection of Israel's existence and they wanted to continue armed struggle against Israel until total liberation, they joined Hamas when they saw that the PLO started to move towards a two-state solution in the 1980s, or in the late 70s even. That's one thing. The other root of Hamas is the wave of modern political Islamism in the Middle East, which developed since the 1920s, 30s, but then had a massive surge after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, 1979, which at first was not so much a material influence on Hamas, but an ideological influence on Hamas, that the revolution in Iran was seen as a proof that an Islamically guided rejection of Western power, Western influence, a revolutionary movement, a militant movement could actually win in the Middle East. So this Islamism that also loads the question of Palestine mostly in a religious way, not in a secular nationalist way, but in a religious way, is the second pillar of Hamas. And just, I'm finishing my answer. A very good example of that is that in the parlance or in the language of the PLO, Yasser Arafat and so, there was always the talk of Palestine as the legitimate homeland of the Arab Palestinian people who have the right to sovereignty in their homeland. With the Hamas, now they talk similar a bit after they have changed their rhetoric in the last years, but in the beginning years, in the first decades of the existence of Hamas, they just as much talked about an Islamic duty to reconquer Jerusalem. So they would say, we can't do a compromise with Israel because God has forbidden us from doing that. We need to liberate all the land from Israel, in their language, because there's a divine order for the Muslims to control all of Palestine.
Also wir haben etwas gehört über Hamzas Flucht aus Gaza zunächst, über seine Teilnahme an den We Want to Live-Protesten, die sich zunächst für Verbesserung der Lebensbedingungen in Gaza einsetzten, die allerdings ziemlich gewaltsam verfolgt, niedergeschlagen wurden von der Hamas. Und er hat besonders nochmal hervorgehoben, dass sich für innerpalästinensische Konflikte außerhalb von Palästina kaum jemand interessiert, sondern erst wenn Israel mit in dieses Spiel reinkommt, dann gibt es Medienberichterstattung. Er hat darüber berichtet, wie enttäuscht er war, dass sich keine Menschenrechtsorganisationen dafür interessiert haben, wie er inhaftiert war, wie er und seine Kolleginnen und Freunde festgenommen wurden. Und als ich dann gefragt habe, was die ersten Gedanken waren nach dem 7. Oktober, meinte er, nun ja, also es gab schon andere Vorfälle, wo Hamas vorher angegriffen hat und Menschen gestorben sind, und diesmal wusste er, die Zahl ist einfach zu groß, als dass das nicht eine sehr, sehr brutale Gegenreaktion zur Folge haben wird. Also Hamza war das einigermaßen klar. Tom hat es weitgehend überrascht. Von Tom lernen wir etwas über die zwei Säulen der palästinensischen, der Hamas und wie insbesondere die religiöse Komponente im zunehmenden Maße eine Rolle spielt. Es geht also der Hamas als politischer Partei im Gazastreifen zunehmend mehr darum, aus einem religiösen Motiv heraus ganz Israel zu erobern, bis hin zu Jerusalem. Habe ich das einigermaßen vernünftig zusammengefasst? Also die Hamas ist entstanden aus einerseits der militanten Zurückweisung der Existenz Israels, als zu einer Zeit, in der andere Teile der palästinensischen Nationalbewegung zum Kompromiss sich hinbewegten. Zweitens aus einer islamischen Lesart, dass der Kompromiss eben religiös verboten sei und dass man erstmal mit Israel keinen Kompromiss machen darf. Die Hamas hat sich selbst allerdings tendenziell in ihrer Geschichte eher weg von dieser religiösen Lesart, eher hin zu einer nationalistischen Lesart bewegt. Tendenziell, ja? Nicht vollständig, aber das ist heute schwächer betont, als es das in der Vergangenheit war, dieser religiöse Impuls. Aber das war für die Gründung der Hamas ganz entscheidend. So, Hamza, we just heard you. You were expecting a massive destruction in Gaza. Over 17% of the Gaza Strip is now destroyed, even when you heard about the first attacks. And I'm interested in, what do you think, what primarily motivated Hamas to even consider such an attack on Israel? Because I believe they also knew that this is going to result in a retaliate action.
Actually, in my opinion, there is more than one reason for the massacre they committed. The first thing is that Hamas somehow felt isolated recently, especially considering the normalization agreements with Israel and Saudi Arabia. So they felt that they are somehow marginalized, and they wanted to ruin this. And let's not forget that they are backed by Iran, and for sure Iran does not want to see a normalization agreement with Israel in the region. That's one thing. The second thing is that they felt the anger of the people inside, and that's what Hamas does every time when they feel that the society is upset of Hamas, or that they want somehow an improvement in their lives, or an achievement at least. And for them, they thought if they managed to kidnap Israeli hostages, and then if they did like a deal to exchange some Palestinian prisoners, they would come to their people as the superheroes. And I believe that's the reason why the Hamas's leadership insists until the moment that they will not go for any agreement that does not include freeing some of the Palestinian prisoners, especially those who have blood on their hands.
Maybe a question for both of you. I just recently read a book on October 7 by Israeli-American author Ron Leshem. Maybe you know it. It's called Fire. You know it, of course.
I read it, yes.
Of course you do. Hamas, and his theory is that Hamas knew that Israel would brutally react to such an attack, and it is precisely this reaction that they wanted in order to gain support from the surrounding Arab states and maybe even the West. So this is a very sensible thing, because this implies they calculated with the loss of many Palestinian lives. Would you agree? Maybe who wants?
First of all, I read the book by Ron Leshem, or Leshem? Leshem, right?
Leshem, as I recall.
Leshem, yeah, Leshem. I liked in the book very much the empathy he still has for the plight of Palestinians and also for their political rights. On the other hand, the book contains quite a bit of misinformation about the history of the conflict. I mean, just wrong facts. But that is normal, because people on both sides of the conflict largely believe in historical myths about the conflict. That's normal. So the book includes national myths that are wrong facts, but still I really liked the feelings that the author transports about his Israeli identity and also about his political wish for liberal Israel and for peace with Palestine. I think, okay, I'm going to quote. This is not a Hamas quote, but it's very similar to Hamas ideology. سنقاتل لأجل هذه المدينة المقدسة إلى آخر الطفل آخر الشبل. We will fight for this holy city until the last child.
Actually, this is a Hamas quote.
Yeah, might be. Yeah, the Hamas says something like this. I didn't quote it. The one who said this was not a Hamas person from Islamic Jihad, but this is actually what they want. Yes, in the ideology of Hamas, the dead Palestinian civilians are martyrs to go to heaven, and in the ideology of Hamas, all Palestinians are part of this community of Muslim Palestinian people who, as a whole, are fighting against Israel and Zionism. For them, everybody is a member of their fighting community. Yeah, so they don't really ideologically distinguish on their own side even between civilians and soldiers. But on the other hand, of course, they calculate internationally with the fact that the civilian victims will enhance pressure on Israel. Yeah, so they accept this. Yeah, they also have. I need to add this. I just quoted the religious reasoning of Hamas, but there's also a secular one. From the perspective of Hamas, Israel's existence is an aggression, and they will say, and this is the most commonly used argument by Hamas to excuse their role in the creation of Palestinian civilian casualties. They will say, we have all the right in the world to fight the aggressor. If they hit back, it's still part of their aggression, because without the Zionist occupation of our land, we would not even have a conflict. So for them, it's a bit like saying in Mariupol, the civilians in Mariupol, is Putin at fault for them? Of course, but from the perspective of Hamas, this is the same, because they are fighting a liberatory struggle. And the occupier should leave. Any casualties are on them, because they should just leave the occupied land. That is the reasoning of Hamas, actually. But still, it is very much calculated, also from the perspective of course, increasing pressure on Israel. And I mean, of course, to say still one more thing, of course, Hamas has built a network of tunnels under Gaza, which maybe the world has never seen. Probably in Switzerland they have something similar. But only the Hamas people are in the tunnels. Yeah, and I mean, of course, they know what will happen to the civilians. Yeah, but there's no other way to fight in Gaza. But I mean, still, that's what they do, and they have calculated this.
Actually, I didn't read the book yet.
You don't have to.
Yeah. But yes, what you said is true, and that's maybe proven by, if we went back to Yahya Sinwar's speeches, and it's recorded on YouTube. He said in 2021 that we are going to isolate Israel. And I was listening to another speech by Khaled Mish'al, who is also a Hamas leader, yesterday, and he said our losses are tactical losses. 40,000 civilian casualties are tactical losses. Anyway, so this is one thing, and there is another reason, and it's not only limited to Hamas, it's also for the PLO, which is the misportrayal of the colonial and non-colonial subject about Palestine and Israel. There is a misconception with them that they are trying to somehow portray the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as of the Algerian-French conflict. So they think that the Jews, the French has their country to go back to it. But they don't realize that the Jews don't have another country to go back to it. And that's the reason why they continue to reject the Jewish identity, and why they don't care about the losses of the civilian casualties. If we thought about the Algerian-French conflict, there was more than 1 million victims. So for them, it's only a collateral damage.
And considering this, Hamza, how did the support among the Gaza people for Hamas change since October 7? I mean, we have some survey data from Gaza. It seems to me that many of the survey data that we get here is mainly unreliable. And so I know that you're not the voice of public opinion of Gaza, but maybe you have some insight for us.
Actually, if you asked me this question before the war, I would say that the mass majority in the Gaza Strip are supporting Hamas. I wouldn't say politically, but because they believe in the armed resistance narrative, and that the Hamas is somehow going to liberate them. But post the war, I realized that the majority of the Gazan society are now rejecting Hamas and their ideology. Even those whom I knew that they wouldn't go for a two-state solution are now calling for it. Even Ismail Haniya's political consultant became an anti-Hamas person in Gaza. They realized and saw with their hands that that for Hamas, they are nothing. They saw that Hamas abandoned them, they went in the tunnels and left them to live with the consequences of Hamas's actions. So I would say that the mass majority in the Gaza Strip are desperate for a change right now, and as much as it's a hard situation, but I would say that this is a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity to somehow downsize at least the scale of violence in the region.
Also wir haben etwas gelernt über das Motiv der Hamas, diesen Angriff vom 7. Oktober durchzuführen. Ich habe einen israelisch-amerikanischen Autor zitiert, den Tom nur zur Hälfte mag, und der meinte, dass das kalkulierte, dass die sterbenden Palästinenser für die Hamas eine kalkulierte Situation sind. Also dass ihnen vollkommen klar war, dass wenn sie einen solchen Angriff durchführen, es einen massiven Gegenangriff geben wird. Und Tom und Hamza haben weitgehend bestätigt, dass für die politische Ideologie der Hamas gestorbene Palästinenserinnen Märtyrer sind und ein Teil dieser Rechnung sind. Und dann habe ich Hamza noch etwas darüber gefragt, wie er es beurteilt, wie er die Unterstützung für die Hamas im Gazastreifen beurteilt, wie sie sich verändert hat seit dem 7. Oktober. Und er meinte, das könnte übergegangen sein in einen Zustand, der ehemals große Unterstützung war, hin zu einem Zustand, wo jetzt sich sehr viele Leute wünschen, dass sich endlich etwas ändert. Tom, maybe let's have a look into the Israeli side. I think it's safe to say that Israel experienced a political shift to the right in the last couple of years, despite the Israeli left still being active. Do you think October 7 affected this in any way, shape or form?
I am not an expert on Israeli interior politics because I don't speak Hebrew. I can only judge by what I've read in secondary, from secondary information. Thus, it is obvious that the Israeli society has shifted to the right in several respects. We have a rise of the religious right demographically. We have a downfall of secularism in Israel comparatively. And we shouldn't forget the most extreme government in Israel's history was elected at a time when Israel was not completely safe, but when in Israel there was a large majority who thought that they are much stronger. They are on the winning side of the conflict. The Palestinians are getting forgotten, and they're making peace with the Arab world. And the reaction was not a moderation. The reaction was to rather become more extreme, probably because now being more extreme seemed to be something you can do without consequences. That is a very normal thing to happen in such situations. It is not something unusual that says us something about the specifically evil character of the Israeli society. It's still something that needs to be mentioned. Since the war started, I think, I have, of course, many people will crucify me for saying this, but I think the way Israeli society has, even though Israeli policies has often been very harsh, the way Israel society has kept an idealistic commitment to humanistic values, such as within Israel, equal rights for Arabs and Jews, and future solution, peaceful solution of the conflict, over 100 years of conflict in a rather positive way. I don't know how much of that is left since October 7th, because even people I know who are Israeli leftists or former leftists, and not just in the 30 years ago leftists, but current leftists are talking in a very zero-sum language. Zero-sum is that, like, they think everything that hurts Palestinians is good for Israel. Everything, literally everything. And everything that strengthens Palestinians means death to the Jews. And so they are not thinking in any way about a compromise. For them, anything that hurts Gaza, hurts Palestinians in the West Bank, hurts the allies of the Palestinians, is a thing that should be done. Even though they still might say of course we can target civilians, but it's not about compromise anymore. The Israeli society has been flooded with, specifically a genocidal ideologies and speech since October 7th. This is also sadly something that has happened to children too. And I think, again, people will not be nice with me for saying this, but the Palestinian society was much more radicalized before October 7th comparatively. Of course, it's the society that has suffered more, but it was also an ideological thing. The radical ideology, how to treat the other, expel the Zionists from Palestine, was a lot stronger before October 7th than on the Israeli side. So Israeli side has made a larger jump in radicalization because there was more of an upside, because Palestinian society was closer to full radicalization, if you might say, which is dangerous and which I currently don't know a way out of.
I'm sorry, can you name your source for this?
Of course not. Of course not. I will not name a 17-year-old girl who told me this when I was giving a workshop.
Is there a possibility to comment, because I think it's really horrible on the 7th of October, especially, but in general also, but especially tonight when we commemorate Jewish villages and kibbutzim that were that were in favor of peace, that were working together with Palestinians, that rescued and helped Palestinians to go to Israeli hospitals and stuff. And those were killed, sexually abused, and murdered and burned. And suddenly now to listen to genocidal speeches, I don't know, I mean, from rabbis, I'm sorry. I mean, in contrast to you, I speak Hebrew and I never heard what you are talking about. So please, can we, especially in this evening,
Well, you should listen to the Israeli finance minister, the Israeli minister of finance, governor of the occupied West Bank.
society, and you can't, and I mean,
I can name you three polls that were made in Israel in the last months. There was a poll, should Israel allow the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza?
But they do.
68% of Israeli Jews were against it, which would mean starvation in Gaza. There was another opinion poll from August or September from Pew Research Center.
Doctor from Gaza who lives here now and who told me that Hamas is capturing all the humanitarian goods entering into the Gaza
Yes.
and selling it at 100%.
Yes, which I think is still a lot incomparably better. I would rather want all humanitarian aid in the world go to Hamas and then being sold to the population rather than the people starving to death. Obviously, I think this is not something we need to discuss. Yeah. Another opinion poll, because you asked from Israeli society, over 70% of Israeli Jews were in favor of censoring social media content that talks about the suffering of civilians in Gaza. That's bad developments. And I said clearly that in Israeli society, the will to peace and the humanist outlook towards the other side was a lot higher than before the war, probably among Palestinians from what we know. I just talked about, I didn't say it turned on its head. I said so there was a larger jump in radicalization of Israeli society. I could go on quite good. And I mean, of course, the finance minister of the elected government, or the interior, the national defense minister, or I counted about 7 or 8 of 38 ministers in the Israeli government said something to the effect of advocating for genocide in Gaza. I can give you the names. I can tell you about those people, like Shlomo Karhi and people like this.
But you were quoting rabbis who are preaching in synagogues
Yes.
in the diaspora that if Gaza should, or all Palestinians should be killed.
I think we
I
can
think,
talk about this later.
Yeah. So, Tom, you promised to make people angry, and you did. And you also made me a little bit angry, but maybe let's postpone this to a moment when we can discuss these questions. I think you both have a very valid point. This is not maybe the time and space to point to single quotes that someone overheard from somewhere on this October 7. But you're also right, there is some of this kind of rhetoric even going around in the highest officials of Israel. So, but you also, and I have to reject that, talking about Israel being fundamentally somehow evil society. Please remember, it's the same society in which before October 7, hundreds of thousands of people protested against Benjamin Netanyahu and his constitutional reform. And it's also the same society in where organizations like Standing Together are trying to advocate for peace, just like Hamza does, between Israelis and Palestinians. But maybe let's continue a little bit. So far we talked about the situation before October 7. We talked about the day itself and its immediate aftermath. And so maybe let's fast forward a bit to the situation we are in today. And only a few days ago, the IDF began its ground invasion to Lebanon. And also, only a few days ago, Iran attacked Israel with the biggest barrage of rockets fired on the country since, I don't know, maybe decades, years, I'm not quite sure. What started as an attack by a military group on a state and its people has now developed into something that appears to be already a multi-front regional war. Hamza, despite this situation, you keep advocating for peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and many other people do too. You write articles and you participate in talks like this. You do a lot of social media work. Please tell us a little bit more about your experiences during the past years advocating for peace. What reactions do you get to your work, from your work?
Actually, I started doing this sort of activism since October the 7th because I believe that there is a big problem within the Gazan society, which is that people don't hear from the moderate voices within the Gazan society, and they do exist, by the way. There is a majority of moderate voices in the Gaza Strip, but unfortunately they are somehow censored, or they cannot express their opinions without having consequences. And I can recall a friend of mine who was, by the way, imprisoned with me. He simply wrote a post on Facebook during the war, just calling Hamas to end the war. He did not call for peace or anything. Unfortunately, that ended up with Hamas torturing him. He stayed in the IC in Gaza's hospital for 1 month, and now he's receiving medical care in the UAE. So you can imagine how hard it is for a moderate voice in Gaza to just stand and say, I'm against Hamas, I'm for peace. It's hard, but it's not impossible. The second thing is, which is, I receive a good and bad reactions to my activism. I received some people who say that all the Palestinians are terrorists, there is no hope of making peace with the Palestinians. And this is something scary. Whenever you start to dehumanize and demonize the other side, you are simply opening a back door for their suffering. And on the other hand, I receive some gratitude, and especially from people from the Gazan society, by the way, who thank me because they say that you are saying what we want to say, but because of our conditions, we can't do that. You have the opportunity, so don't just stay silent. That's exactly why I'm doing it.
At the same time, you've encountered, I guess, protesters in especially the Western countries who are arguably vowing for the Palestinian cause. And I remember an article of you that referred especially to the US campus protesters saying, quote, "You're hurting the Palestinian cause." What do you mean by hurting the Palestinian cause?
Because the situation in the campus protest in the US is somehow different from the situation in Germany. Yes, there is some sort of radicalization with the protest in Germany, but compared to the US, it's nothing. I noticed that in these protests, unfortunately, some pro-Palestinian people go sharing some anti-Semitic slogans for the Jews, go back to Holland, or stuff like that. And I felt ashamed that this is coming from someone who is a pro-Palestinian. This is not the way that you can be a pro-Palestinian. Another aspect, which is seeing those folks raising Hamas's flags or Hezbollah flags, I felt betrayal, because I felt that they are supporting the same regime who tortured me, who tortured my friends, simply because they hate Israel. And I won't generalize that to all the protests, but that was the situation in the majority of the protests in the US.
Okay. Tom, you are also monitoring the discourse on Israel-Palestine, not just since last year, but since many years. And what are some changes that you observed in these two camps, let's say, that exist for as long as I can think?
Look, Konstantin, so now I'm going to talk about radicalization on the Palestinian or pro-Palestinian side, and I think nobody will interrupt me shouting when I say very, very pessimistic things about this side, and when I quote things people have told me. So now when I tell you that I talked to a major organizer of a pro-Palestinian organization in Germany, and she told me that there are no Israeli civilians and that Jerusalem will be the future of the world caliphate, but that in the public, of course, they talk about the human rights of Palestinians. Nobody will interrupt me because that probably is more believable. When I mean, you asked me about what I think, what changed in Israeli society. So to the worst, that was the specific question. What changed probably in terms of radicalization? I answered that question. So when I talk about the global Palestinian movement, I think that the big problem with that is that almost everything the global pro-Palestinian movement is doing is hurting the Palestinians and is hurting Israelis, because they follow an ideology of absolute liberation from the force of evil, which for them is Zionism. And I personally think, I have a theory about this, like it's a kind of a social theory, I don't know, I can't explain it at length now, but I think there's a deep connection between the traditional thought of anti-Semitism and the absoluteness with which no coexistence with Israel or the Zionist entity or the settler colonial entity can be thought, because they take from the playbook of anti-Semitism the idea of the illegitimate Jewish rule, which is something that cannot be tolerated. If they saw Jews as below them, yeah, if they saw Jews as stupid, animal-like people, they could probably more coexist with them while hating them. But the idea that there's a special quality about Jews ruling over others cannot be tolerated. This is what unites radical global anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And this is what I think makes the aggressive part of the global pro-Palestine movement so virulent, so virulently negative and hateful. On the other hand, many people globally are not radicalized anti-Semites and anti-Zionists. They see the death and destruction in Gaza, they see the suffering of the people, and they ask themselves, how is it possible that this is not be stopped? Don't get me wrong. When in the Ethiopian civil war, 500,000 people died, nobody cared for it. Absolutely, okay, there was COVID, but nobody cared for it. There is something, some quality, you might say, about Jews that makes people both be more happy when they die, but also be more angry when they kill. Also sometimes works the other way around. But I think we see global Palestinian solidarity movement that to a large part does not want peace, but wants the destruction of Israel and of the Jewish political community in Israel-Palestine. And this extremely negative development, in my opinion, has a root in the absoluteness of enmity that traditionally anti-Semitism has showed towards the Jews, which are imagined as the one group with which you cannot coexist.
Well, now, okay, sure.
I just wanted to comment about the radicalization of the Gazan society, because I believe there is an underestimation for the status quo in the Gaza Strip. People just act as if they are surprised that the Gazan society is radicalized, and people should think that the Gazan society lived with the ideology of terrorism or jihadism, Hamas jihadism, more than the Germans lived with Nazi Germany. So they were lived for more than 20 years. Whether they liked it or not, they were grasping this ideology. And Hamas was not the only part on that. There was another part, the other part who described Hamas as an asset. And this is how the Israeli finance minister described Hamas. So there was an intended process of radicalizing the Gazan society. It did not come out of the blue.
Now we're in a situation where we see in many Western states a rise of anti-Semitism that is seemingly not even connected to any Israel-Palestine discourse. We see attacks on Jewish graves, on Jewish institutions, or on Jewish people just in general. And do you think, Tom, this is maybe it's a question for you both, that this rise of anti-Semitism parallel to an escalating conflict, which is nothing new, but you both just agreed that we're seeing a radicalization here that somehow seems like it stays and it's not going away when the conflict goes away. What do you think?
Shall I say something about what I consider to be leftist anti-Semitism? Would that be an answer to what you are saying?
Not quite sure how helpful, but go ahead.
I think what we're currently seeing in the global left is a complete breakdown of the boundary between the motive of leftist thought and the motive of anti-Semitic thought. I'm just explaining. I'm just going further into what I just said. We have traditionally the left-on idea. The ones who are ruling us are preventing that we live a happy life. That's a core idea also of Marxist thought. The ruling structure is what prevents us from happiness. Anti-Semitism has a similar idea about how the world works. It just answers who's ruling us. It's the Jews who are making our happy life impossible. That's also why anti-Semitism has been called in the past the socialism of fools. Now, of course, in the past there was a leftist criticism of anti-Semitism, which prevented those two thoughts from aligning completely, or from aligning in general. Now, with certain developments in the global left, the rise of groups like Stalinism, Maoism, anti-imperialism, those boundaries became a bit weaker in general. And with Israel currently, we have a situation where there's actually something such as Jews ruling oppressively, which is not the result of Jews or Zionism in its nature, which is the result of a national conflict. Yeah? But the interpretation for this national conflict, in which we find unjust actions unjust actions by a collective of Jews, which is the Jewish nation state, the interpretation of anti-Semitism, which is the unjust Jewish rule which prevents us from our happy life, has globally increased and has led to a often complete mix of leftist anti-Zionism, right-wing anti-Semitism, and eschatological thinking about how the whole world will be a just place if just there was no Jewish rule, which is the Jewish rule in Israel-Palestine. I also want to just add one last thing. I personally am rather, you might say, I'm not one of those who has a lot of understanding for the situation, especially which, for example, in certain communities where hatred against Jews is seen as a natural result of this conflict, and where actions against Jewish life in Germany, for example, are seen as the result of an emotionalization that is to be understood when genocide is happening in Palestine. So when I was on a panel talk, last sentence, when I was in a panel talk in Freiburg a few months ago, there was a group of Jewish students who had attended, and after the talk they came to me and said, "Wow, we loved this panel talk. It was so nuanced. We talked about Israel-Palestine in a nuanced way. How can we use this nuance when we encounter anti-Semitism or an aggressive rejection of Israel that takes us as representatives of Israel just because we're Jews? How can this nuanced discussion help us?" And I said, it can't. Nuanced discussion of Israel-Palestine is not what those people want. Those people want an enemy, and they have the fantasy of destroying the enemy, and their rage is because of their impotence, because they are not able to destroy this enemy. So when you encounter this, call the police. Don't call me as an academic who talks in a nuanced way. Call the police.
You want to add something to this? You don't have to. Ich versuche es nochmal zusammenzufassen, was die letzten 15 Minuten passiert ist. Wir haben über die pro-palästinensischen Proteste gesprochen, die, glaube ich, das kann man guten Gewissens sagen, ein Ausmaß erreicht haben, sowohl in Deutschland als auch in anderen Staaten, das wir vorher so noch nicht gesehen haben, sowohl in Menge als auch, und da haben mir die beiden Panelisten zugestimmt, in der Form von Radikalisierung. Ich habe Hamzas Artikel zitiert, der vor knapp einem Dreivierteljahr erschienen ist, wo er meinte, dass viele palästinensische Proteste, er bezog sich da besonders auf die US-Campus-Proteste, der palästinensischen Sache schaden, weil sie teils ideologische Phrasierungen der Hamas übernehmen, wenn es um den sogenannten Widerstand oder um die Märtyrerschaft geht, weil die Protestierenden das einfach übernehmen und sich sozusagen der Sache anschließen, wohingegen er wiederum aus Gaza selbst oft die Rückmeldung bekommt: Vielen Dank, dass du in den westlichen Ländern deine Stimme erhebst auf eine Art und Weise, wie wir es hier nicht können, denn hier wird unser Ruf nach einem Ende der Hamas-Herrschaft und unser Ruf nach Frieden unterdrückt. Tom hat einige Ausführungen zur Logik der Verbindung zwischen Antizionismus und Antisemitismus transportiert, die mir sehr schwer fallen, jetzt in kurzer Zeit zusammenzufassen. Vielleicht können wir darüber nachher noch ein bisschen länger diskutieren. If I can see it correctly, we're already running out of time a little bit. I prepared one last set of questions for both of you, which is a little bit of an outlook concerning this conflict.
Now Hamza will start. With the answer.
And after that, I will take turns and take questions from the audience translated to you, or you can ask Tom directly, as you have already done. Hamza, what needs to happen to even imagine a pathway to peace in the Middle East right now? I know this is a loaded question, but take your time.
At first, there should be somehow a pressure on both of our states, on Israel and on Palestine, because if that was left to our leadership, they would never sit together. So there is a responsibility for the foreign governments to somehow force the Palestinians and the Israelis to sit together on the table to somehow reach a reconciliation. And there is an opportunity with that, with the normalization agreements happening in the Middle East, so that can be somehow a part of it. The second is for the Israeli government. The Palestinian people need to hear from them, because for the Gazan society, we'd never heard it from the Israeli society unless it was Hamas's propaganda or the escalation between Hamas and the IDF. And I believe that Israel has the ability to be constructive. And at third, there should be somehow a real reform of the Palestinian leadership. A Palestinian leadership that really cares about its own people rather than being anti-Israel or being a corrupt leadership.
Do you think that if Hamas disappears one day, just imagine it disappears, however that will come to pass, do you think there are right now enough moderate forces, political forces in Gaza to replace Hamas with something more peaceful?
Actually, disappearing Hamas wouldn't still solve the problem, because there was a conflict between Palestinians and Israelis even before Hamas exists. So there should be somehow, as I said, listening to the moderate voices in the Gaza Strip, to the pragmatic voices, and to get that with the Israeli society, because the pragmatic voices in the Palestinian society won't work alone, and that's also the case for the Israeli society. So that's why I say that there is a responsibility for the foreign governments to force the both sides to sit together.
You want to add something, Tom?
That was a question for Hamza.
Okay. Alright, so Hamza, ich habe Hamza jetzt zum Schluss noch einmal gefragt, was er glaubt, was ein Ausblick sein könnte für diesen Konflikt, und er hat noch einmal betont, dass es wichtig wäre, dass auf diese beiden Kräfte, Israel und die Hamas, von außen Druck ausgeübt werden muss, denn von innen heraus, zumindest was die Hamas betrifft, wird sich da keine konstruktive Lösung anbahnen, und er glaubt allerdings auch, dass in Israel konstruktive Kräfte und moderate Kräfte durchaus vorhanden sind, aber auch die werden zurzeit übertönt von einer Rhetorik, die erstmal keinen Ausweg aus diesem Krieg sieht, wenn ich das einigermaßen vernünftig zusammengefasst habe. All right, so far it has been some kind of a heavy talk with some insightful thoughts and opinions, at least in my opinion. If any of you would like to discuss something I did not mention, maybe a whole block of topic, we have like 10 minutes left for any of that.
I still wanted to add to the most controversial answer of the evening, which is my answer to your question: how Israeli society changed for the worse. I think
dig your grave deeper if you want to.
What?
Go. I'm concerned that you're hurting your.
No, I don't know. The thing is that such conflict and massacres create, such as October 7th, create radicalization, is something which I find to be completely expectable, even if I don't like it. But it is not something I want to say about the deeply evil core of Israeli society. I just want to say we're reaching a situation now where both sides consider the other side to be of such a dangerous nature that for them accepting the other side's humanity seems to be a danger for the self, because once you accept the other side's humanity, you still expect him to come and kill you. And this is something that Israelis experienced on October 7th. This is also something that has deep roots in the Palestinian national consciousness from 1948, from 1917, but also, for example, from 1982, when there was a massacre of a similar size of October 7th of Palestinians in the Lebanese civil war, not perpetrated by Israel, but with a certain Israeli collaboration by Lebanese militiamen. And such violence creates radicalization. And talking about it is, I think, especially what we need on this day, because I think we need to find a way out of that. And I do not want to find a way out of that by just demonizing one side, blaming it for all the violence. I don't want to blame Israel for all the violence, and then saying this side is so evil we can't work with it. I want to do the opposite of that.
All right, so far I would like to thank my two panel guests, Hamza Howidy and Tom Würdemann, for participating in this. It's been a pleasure hearing you talk, and it's a special pleasure to me to have you here, Hamza, since we only talked on the phone so far, and it's, I think, for me it's very nice to hear your very moderate and clever opinions, both of you, especially in a time where there are neither moderate nor clever opinions like in full effect. Now, I am taking questions from the audience. Ich werde jetzt Fragen aus dem Publikum entgegennehmen, und wenn ihr diese an Hamza richten möchtet und das auf Deutsch tun möchtet, dann werde ich euer Simultanübersetzer sein, so gut das geht. Peter hält dort hinten schon ein Publikumsmikrofon hoch, das du auch selber hier herumtragen wirst, oder das ich hier herumtrage? Okay, das wirst du auch selber hier herumtragen, und wenn ihr Tom etwas fragen möchtet, dann könnt ihr das in jeder Sprache tun, die ihr möchtet, außer Hebräisch.
Also ich mache es jetzt doch auf Deutsch, obwohl ich alles auf Englisch verstanden habe, egal. Die Lage dort in Israel und Gaza ist für mich erstmal unlösbar. Aber was machen wir denn jetzt? Ja, also für mich bleibt die Frage, wie sich die Exilgesellschaft, ja, die Diaspora, sagt man ja, zusammenfinden kann, um von außen einzuwirken. Also was ich nicht verstehe ist, warum wir es nicht schaffen, die Stimmen, die miteinander reden können und wollen, stark zu machen. Das wünsche ich mir. Und die Frage ist an Sie beide: Gibt es diese Räume, diese Safe Spaces, wo das möglich ist, wo etwas beginnt? Das ist meine Frage.
The question asked is if there's room and space for forces outside of Israel and Palestine who can come together and find any form of force, peaceful force. And for me, if I could answer too, is there are some organizations that I like to point at when it comes to these questions. In Germany, it's Palestinians and Israelis for Peace. In Israel, it's Standing Together. And I think I'm missing out on something, but you know where the question leads to. So if something comes to your mind.
No, actually, I think that Standing Together is a prominent organization that can be a good answer for your question.
Tom, do you know anything else?
There are organizations like, for example, my friend Uri has organized the Israeli-Palestinian Dialogue Forum called Tech to Peace, which still works after October 7th, even though the conversations have become heartbreaking, because still the people who participate in dialogue, Israelis and Palestinians, both sides, the ones who actually want to still do dialogue are not finding much space anymore for that, because still both sides feel super threatened by the other side. I would like more to answer on the first part of the question, which was more like, what can we do? What can we do? I think, in my opinion, what we can do is fight racism and anti-Semitism in our society. We should fight the attribution of the Palestinian cause as the ultimate fight against the illegitimate secret rule. Yeah? We should fight the idea that fighting Israel means fighting against the demonic force of evil that needs to fall if we are going to be happy. We also need to fight the racist dehumanization of Palestinians, which works ideologically a bit different, which is the idea that Palestinians are because of their primitive barbaric ideology can be compared to animals, and if they die it's anyway their own fault or their leader's fault, but well, it doesn't really matter what happens to them, and that their voices are not giving the weight of humanity, are the two different ways. Palestinians are dehumanized, Israelis are demonized, I think, in the discourses of enmity on both sides. And I think we should see this difference as I analyze it. We should see dehumanization of Palestinians, demonization of Israel, and fight it in our society, because we in Germany can't solve the Israel-Palestine conflict, but this conflict has developed a very toxic dynamic within our society where racists, especially from the conservative part of society, not from the far right, but from the conservative part of our society, are using Palestine as a metaphor for barbarism, flooding our lands, yeah, that needs to be held down, fought, expelled, while people are also using Israel as a metaphor for the evil secret rule, for the evil elite that needs to be fought by all means and whose end and downfall will be a celebration. Yeah? This is kind of how I analyze it, and which I think we need to fight.
Okay. Hi, Tom. Hi, Hamza. My name is Mickey, and we already met like indirectly because you both were writing texts for a brochure that I am for Amadeo Antonio Stiftung Hamza. Maybe you remember we interviewed you. So I think I want to add something. It is quite a brave thing to make an event on October 7 about the last year and about what happened without having a Jewish or Israeli voice sitting on the stage. But still, I decided to come because I think that moderate voices from the Arab, Muslimic, Islamic, whatever you might call it, side are pretty rare. This is also the reason why we wanted to have you on board in our brochure. I think what really caused the anger earlier, like 20 minutes ago, is that there's no way to equalize the so-called radicalization of the Israeli society that you mentioned, Tom, with what we understand is radicalization on the Palestinian side. Because it was actually Israeli Jewish people who woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning and who got slaughtered and whose children were murdered in front of their own eyes in the morning of a Shabbat. And it was civilian people who died in their houses. To mention people from the Israeli government being radical, talking this and talking that, yes, it happens. It happens on the Arab side all of the time, every day. Every day, Israel is the cancer. Every day, Israel is the union that has to be vanished so peace can come in the Middle East. I think to equalize radicalizations on both sides is critical. I understand where you are going, but there's one last aspect that I want to add. The number of Israelis and Jews, let's say Israelis in Israel, who are torn and who still go on the street for peace and for prospects that they used to before October 7 is big. The number of Jews in the diaspora being more on the left spectrum and fighting for the Palestinian cause is huge. How big is the part of the Arab Palestinian side that goes out like you do, that goes out and talks loudly about possibilities to coexist? How many politicians from the Arab side talk about coexistence? So I think this is what is difficult to do. The equalization of both, I think, cannot be done in this, especially on this day, but actually I think it's difficult to do that.
So at first, I identify as a Palestinian. I'm not Arab, I'm not Muslim. About the radicalization, what you said is true. The level of radicalization within the Gaza society is much bigger than it is in the Israeli society. But there is also, as Tom said, there is a high increase in the radicalization within the Israeli society. According to the PEW Research Institute, more than 80% of the Israeli society do not want to see any pictures or videos of the civilian suffering in the Gaza Strip. What's happening in the Gaza Strip is censored by the Israeli government, and it's not posted by the Israeli media. It's not only an official statement, it's statistics. And for the protests taking place in Tel Aviv, yes, they are protesting, but the question is what they are protesting for, because according also to the recent researches within the Israeli society, more than 50% wouldn't go for a two-state solution. In fact, they are protesting just to replace the regime there, not for peace, that doesn't make them a bad people, especially during such circumstances. I wouldn't expect them to call for peace. And about the last statement about the moderate voices, actually they do exist, but the question is that are we going to listen to them, or that what they can achieve? Because if the moderate voices cannot achieve anything, the radical voices will take the opportunity and radicalize the Gazan society. I'm not the only one. At the most recent General Assembly of the United Nations, the Jordanian foreign minister said an important statement. He said that not only him, but all the Muslim and the Arab countries are willing to ensure Israel's security if they are going for a two-state solution or to end the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza.
If I'm also meant with the Muslimic voices, can answer. So I try to be very careful. So first, I can only repeat. I was asked about radicalization in Israeli society. I was not asked about radicalization in the one Arab society. Yeah? I could talk about this very long, much longer actually than I could talk about radicalization on the Israeli side. But then I would have not answered Konstantin's question. Yeah? That's the one thing. The other thing is that I mentioned in one of my last answers something like Sabra and Shatila. When October 7th causes, when we should not talk about radicalization on the Israeli side, because October 7th was a massacre and it is somehow, it shows bad taste to talk afterwards about radicalization on the Israeli side. In Sabra and Shatila, Palestinians were massacred. Probably the number of dead civilians was actually higher than on October 7th. But can we not talk about Palestinian radicalization afterwards? Is radicalization of Palestinian society after the experience of such a massacre, I repeat, this was not a massacre Israeli troops committed, it was still a massacre of Palestinians, would it be improper to talk about what problems also arise from the radicalization of Palestinian society that comes from experiences of suffering afterwards? I strongly disbelieve in that, and often I am called heartless for this, actually much more often by Palestinians than by Israelis, when they tell me, how dare you talk about the feelings and the anger of Palestinians in a time when they're being slaughtered? And I say, of course, this is a bit heartless, but still it does not help us to not talk about it. And understanding why someone wants to kill their neighbor on whatever emotional level does neither make it right, nor does it help us to prevent future murder. So actually, I personally think that this is something that's necessary and that we need to talk about.
Can I just add that I didn't say not to talk about radicalization. I just said not to equalize it. I just said that there is a difference in the radicalization that you are talking about.
Did I say any? I actually said explicitly that the Palestinian society is more radicalized than the Israeli side, in my opinion.
you
I
said
said
it
that two
afterwards.
times.
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
I said that 2 times during it.
I know. I know. I just think that the moment to talk about the Israeli Jewish perspective from a not Israeli Jewish perspective on stage is difficult. That was actually the
Yeah,
point.
Mickey, thank you for your comment. Let me just add something to this, because I think you're right, and I had my troubles with the composer of this panel too, when it was announced that I was moderating this, that we have no Israeli or Jewish perspective on this stage. But at the same time, I was also thinking maybe it's a way to break out of this kind of logic where only people affected by experience, or people maybe not immediately affected, but in a way affected by something that happened, are the only ones who need to explain themselves and their feelings, and that you always need to have this kind of confrontational panel where you have the Israeli Jewish person on the one side and the Palestinian person on the other side, and they're both set up in a way that they are looking to have the most confrontation out of it. I'm not quite sure if this worked today, but I think you have a valid point here. Any other brave questions?
There's one thing I would like to ask both of you, which I didn't really get. If I understood well, you both affirmed that Hamas is a deeply radical movement which pursues an eschatological vision of relief of the world in the moment that the Jewish rule will not be there anymore on the Israeli side. But I understood also, or I heard that you said before, Hamas does not need to be put on the side completely or destroyed completely, something like that. So I would like to understand, how do you envision a way, a path to a solution or to some kind of discussion, negotiation with the Israeli side, whoever will be on the other side, with Hamas still being there?
I think that we all agree that at least the Nazis were worse than Hamas. And right now, not all the Nazis were killed. That doesn't mean that we should make a safe haven for the Hamas folks, but at least their leaders would be held accountable. I wouldn't say killed. And there should be a role for the Palestinian people, especially the Palestinian Authority, along with the assistance of the Arab troops, to take control of the Gaza Strip and to handle the rest of the problem of Hamas's members. Otherwise, if we are going to kill each member of Hamas, that means that we are going to kill almost all the population in the Gaza Strip, because they are embodied within every civilian infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. You might find them in any house, so it's not reasonable to say that. Yeah, it's okay. So I think there's, and they are weak enough in the meantime. I mean, that's what makes me say that there should be an opportunity for the Palestinian Authority, along with the Arab troops, to get Hamas at least out of governing the Strip.
I would recommend, there's a podcast episode from the Times of Israel, Daily Briefing, by the Israeli journalist Chaviv Retiko, who's not a leftist, anti-Zionist Palestinian or something like this, where he talks at length about a new, very big, very professional opinion poll by Dalia Scheindlin, by Khalil Shikaki or Sikaki? Sikaki, by Khalil Sikaki, who have found that on most issues, such as two-state solution, one-state solution, perception of the other, the opinions of Israelis and Palestinians are almost mirror images of each other. Almost mirror images of each other. And I mean, the percentage of, for example, of people on both sides who think the other side wants to destroy them, of people who think which solution is viable, of people who think compromises should be done with the other side is almost the same. Now, Javier Fetikur does not say that this means both sides are equal, because he says still Hamas was the side that attacked, Israeli is the side that has historically been much more open to compromise with the other side. So for him, for example, or Israelis, Jews as a people have historically been more oppressed, but it's still important that in terms of opinion of the other side, there's a strong mirroring of opinions on both sides. And I don't ask you to trust me on that, I ask you to listen to the Times of Israel daily briefing podcast from like 3 weeks ago that talked about it. Come on, there's one more question for Hamza.
Hamza, I have a question to you, because I read it very shortly in one of the articles or interviews you gave to, I don't remember which newspaper or European TV company, about your personal experience with Hamas and your time in the prison and what you experienced there. I would be very, very curious and very interested to know more about that.
Can you say the question again, please?
Personal experience with Hamas. Why did they send you to prison, and what did you experience in prison there?
The crime that I committed, and I was in prison twice because of it, is that I dared to protest against Hamas. And even back then, I didn't come to my current opinions. I didn't say I want peace with Israel or I want to overthrow Hamas, simply because we asked for better economical conditions, for elections, for reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah. That was the crime I committed. And about the experience, I'd say that I don't wish that for anyone, not even my enemies.
Möchte noch... Ich sehe das sehr schlecht, Verzeihung.
Ich mache es auf Deutsch. Das ist, glaube ich, einfach. Ich möchte mal auf diesen Vergleich kommen zwischen den Nazis und der Hamas. Die Nazis haben sozusagen Macht und Einfluss verloren, ich glaube, weil am Ende des Krieges sie verstanden haben, dass sie allein waren. Also die eigenen Leute sind ihnen davon gelaufen. Es gab drumherum keine Verbündeten, es gab keine Alliierten, es gab keine, die mehr an die Idee glaubten. Bei der Hamas, glaube ich, ist das ein bisschen anders, weil sie können sich quasi als Mehrheit fühlen. Sie sind Teil einer großen muslimischen Gemeinschaft. Und vielleicht ist das auch etwas, was animiert, weiterzumachen. Es ist die Mehrheit, es ist eine große Gruppe. Und da setzt dann auch meine Frage ein, warum übernehmen nicht arabische Staaten irgendwo eine Verantwortung und versuchen, eine Entwicklung zumindest zu beginnen, wo es zu einem Frieden oder einem Nebeneinanderleben zumindest kommen könnte. Solange das nicht passiert, gibt es eigentlich gar keinen Grund aufzuhören.
Let me just quickly translate the question. He was referring to the comparison between the Nazis and the Nazi regime and Hamas, and said the Nazi regime came to its downfall because the own people didn't believe in it and they had no allies left, which he claimed to be different for Hamas, because Hamas still presents itself as part of a larger Muslim international community. And the question is, why does no Arabic state take responsibility for what's happening in the conflict and steps in to somehow solve it. Ja, ich hoffe, das habe ich einigermaßen vernünftig wiedergegeben.
I would ask first what sort of interference you are referring to for the Arab states or the Muslim states?
Ja, also in welche, wer soll es tun oder welche Form von Eingriff soll da passieren? Okay, ja, ich weiß, welche Staaten du meinst, aber was sollen die tun? He's referring to talks, discussions, diplomatic efforts of the neighboring states, Egypt, Syria, and so on. Tunisia is not a neighboring state, but you know what I mean. The other Arabic Muslim states just step in and say, let's calm down the situation. Why is this not happening? Why does it feel like everyone is just standing on the sideline and watching the catastrophe unfold?
Actually, that depends on what Arabic state or what Muslim state we are talking about, because the regimes differ and their ways of interference or opinions about the conflict differs. But I'd say that they at least tried at the beginning of it, whether we liked it or not, by calling for the ceasefire talks and this stuff. So I'd say that they tried, but the question is what they can do, or what are their capabilities. They don't have any. They cannot pressure any party. They cannot pressure Israel. They cannot pressure the Palestinian side. And for other Arab countries or Muslim countries, honestly, they want to avoid the headache. They got pissed of this conflict. They don't want to be any part of it. And that's the reason why some Arab states even refuse to send any troops to the Gaza Strip as of peacekeeping forces or something like that.
I think there are two very, very important answers here. The one is...
Tom, du kannst darauf, glaube ich, auf Deutsch antworten. Und bevor ich würde ganz kurz deine Antwort nochmal zurück übersetzen, wenn das in Ordnung ist. Also Hamzas Antwort war, dass es einen Versuch gab von arabischen Staaten am Anfang, etwas zu unternehmen, aber dass auch die Kapazitäten und die Möglichkeiten sehr begrenzt sind, und seiner Meinung nach wollen viele arabische Staaten schlicht sich raushalten aus dieser Sorte Ärger, die ihnen droht, wenn sie sich in diesen Konflikt mit hineinbegeben. Und ja, bitte.
Also ich glaube, da müssen wir zwei verschiedene Sachen unterscheiden. Zunächst einmal ist es vollkommen richtig, und es entspricht genau einem Argument, das ich mehrfach gemacht habe, dass man kann das auch hier könnte man das reden, inwieweit zum Beispiel die amerikanische Rechte und europäische Konservative, die indische Rechte da eine ähnliche Rolle in Israel spielt. Aber in diesem Konflikt ist die palästinensisch-militante Sache ein bisschen high on their own supply. Wie gesagt, das kann man auf beide Seiten anwenden, aber die Frage war auf die arabisch-palästinensische Seite bezogen. Das bedeutet, militante palästinensische Gruppen haben in der Geschichte immer so viel Solidarität von außen erfahren, dass sie nie in der Situation waren, dass sie ihre Taten ernsthaft hinterfragen mussten. Weil sie immer genug Unterstützung und Bestätigung von außen bekommen haben. Das war in den 30er Jahren, 40er Jahren waren das die Nazis, in den 50er, 60er war das der Panarabismus, dann war das auch Saddam Hussein, dann war das ab den 80ern die Islamische Republik Iran. Das ist ein massiver Faktor. Andererseits sind die meisten arabischen Staaten dann relativ klar gegen die Hamas positioniert. Sie haben nur relativ wenig Mittel, damit umzugehen, aus innen- und außenpolitischen Gründen. Ägypten hat zum Beispiel jetzt keine Machtprojektion in den Gazastreifen. Ja? Also was sollen die tun? Wenn sie anfangen würden, Panzer auf die Grenze zurollen zu lassen, würde Israel vermutlich sagen, wenn sie weiterrollen, schießen wir sie ab, weil das gerade die Kriegszone ist, in der Israel Krieg führt. Ja? Also ich weiß nicht, was man sich da vorstellen soll. Es wäre auch sozusagen in dem Moment auch normal. Ja? Also ich weiß nicht, was man sich da vorstellen soll. Und natürlich ist auch die Annahme, es gäbe sozusagen eine Verantwortung aller Muslime weltweit für die Hamas, falsch, obwohl ich durchaus aus einer innermuslimischen Perspektive sagen würde, dass Muslime diese Verantwortung übernehmen sollten, aber man kann sie nicht von außen aufoktroyieren, weil das eine kulturalistische Verallgemeinerung ist, die in Richtung Rassismus geht. Wobei ich das von innen durchaus selber so sehen würde, ja? Aber man kann nicht von außen sagen, warum tun denn die Araber oder die Muslime nichts. Niemand in Marokko ist gezwungen, etwas gegen die Hamas zu tun. Wer verlangt denn von den Marokkanern, dass sie etwas gegen den äthiopischen Bürgerkrieg getan hätten? Ja? Zweitens gibt es natürlich, und das wurde bisher heute interessanterweise noch gar nicht erwähnt, die eine einzige, aber dafür immer noch wirkmächtige Achse, die genau das tut, nämlich die Gruppen unterstützen, die Israel zerstören wollen, nämlich die Iran-Achse. Ja? Quasi alle Bewegungen, Staaten, Milizen, die das Ziel verfolgen, Israel zu zerstören und dabei eine Relevanz im Konflikt haben, werden ja vom Iran kontrolliert heutzutage. Ja? Das ist so mit der Hezbollah, das ist so mit den irakischen Milizen, das ist so mit den Houthis im Jemen, das ist so mit dem Iran selbst und die Hamas wurde nicht vom Iran kontrolliert, aber massiv unterstützt. Ja? An dieser Stelle haben wir eigentlich das Kernproblem und derzeit sind die Dinge ein bisschen ins Rollen geraten, mal sehen, was noch passiert. Dann gibt es natürlich noch den Staat Katar, der ebenfalls die Hamas seit Jahrzehnten unterstützt hat, der seit Jahrzehnten den Islamismus in der Region unterstützt hat. Auch der dann hier deutschen Fußballvereinen als Winterquartier oder sowas dient. Ja? Das ist auch schlimm genug. Ein letzter Punkt, den ich noch machen wollte. Gleichzeitig gibt es da aber natürlich auch die Probleme, dass diejenigen arabischen Staaten, die wirklich etwas machen wollten, es auch nicht immer einfach haben. Also ich habe zum Beispiel einen Freund, der ist arabisch, dessen Namen kann ich auch nennen, der heißt Hossein Abu Bakr Mansour. Der ist vernetzt mit der Regierung der Vereinigten Arabischen Emiraten, mit Israel einen Friedensvertrag haben und bilaterale Beziehungen haben. Und der hat mir erzählt, dass in den Vereinigten Arabischen Emiraten eigentlich nach dem 7. Oktober der Gedanke relativ verbreitet war, wir müssen jetzt etwas tun, wir müssen der palästinensischen Seite helfen. Und dazu gehört eben auch eine Frage, wie kann man Gaza wieder aufbauen, nicht als untertunnelten Ort der Militanz, ja, sozusagen in den Verhältnissen waffenstarrenden Ort der Militanz, sondern mit einer positiven Zukunftsvision. Und er meint aber, das Telefon wurde nicht abgenommen, als man auch in Israel angerufen hat, weil in Israel derzeit eben auch diese Fragen von der Zukunft ganz weit hinten stehen und die militärischen Fragen an Nummer 1, 2 und 3 kommen. Ja. Es ist ja auch eine Sache, die massiv das Ganze derzeit noch erschwert, dass es natürlich auch aus Israel keinen Zukunftsplan für Gaza gibt. Ja? Autonomiebehörde, arabische Staaten, das ist natürlich auch ein Teil des Problems.
Darf ich da eine kurze faktische Ergänzung machen? Es gibt eine zivilgesellschaftliche Grassroots-Bewegung, die heißt
Sharaka, heißt auf Arabisch Partnerschaft, die wurde gegründet, ist bekannt, ja, nach den Abraham-Abkommen von israelischen Arabern und jüdischen Israelis zusammen. Und da werden zivilgesellschaftliche Kontakte in die Staaten der Abraham-Abkommen geknüpft und auch in muslimische Communities in Europa und in den USA. Und das ist eine ganz, ganz beeindruckende Gruppe von Leuten, die eine tolle Arbeit machen und die versuchen, einen Weg zu gehen, der sich unterscheidet und der meiner Meinung nach in die richtige Richtung weist.
Also nur als dazu muss ich jetzt auch wieder eine faktische Ergänzung machen. Eine der wichtigen Aktivistinnen von dieser Gruppe Sharaka hat sowohl Hamza als auch mich bereits als heimlichen Islamisten und heimliche Hamas-Unterstützer öffentlich diffamiert. Ja, also das ist eine Gruppe, die vor allem getragen wird von der israelischen Rechten, die sich ein paar Leute suchen auf der arabischen Seite, die ihre Standpunkte teilen. Diese gleiche Aktivistin macht derzeit auch Videos aus der Mitte des Westjordanlands und sagt, ich stehe hier mitten in Israel, dem historischen Heimatland des jüdischen Volkes, steht dabei, also wirklich genau in der Mitte des Westjordanlandes. Es geht um Rawan Osman, hier kann ich auch einen Namen nennen. Und das ist, ich glaube viel mehr an Organisationen, die wirklich auf Augenhöhe miteinander reden wollen, wie zum Beispiel Standing Together oder wie die Organisation von meinem Freund Uri, die ich schon genannt habe, Tech to Peace, die Dialog wollen und nicht nur das Aufoktroyieren der eigenen nationalistischen Botschaft an Ambassadors im Ausland, die vielleicht bereit sind, die weiterzutragen.
Das war ja schnell diffamiert.
Ich habe Namen genannt, also zumindest kann man mir nicht vorwerfen, ich hätte mich ja irgendwie um die Antwort rumgedrückt.
Es wäre auch gelacht gewesen, wenn wir uns heute hier einig werden würden, aber finde ich, gemessen an den Bedingungen, unter denen dieses Panel stattgefunden hat, ist das doch ganz glimpflich verlaufen. Ich habe nun noch, eigentlich erwarte ich hier ich erwarte dieses Signal. Oh, Verzeihung, es sind noch weitere Fragen. Wollen wir noch, Peter, können wir noch eine Frage nehmen? Oder? Wir sind schon so ein bisschen über 8:30. Wir haben aber auch ein bisschen nach 7 angefangen.
Hier vorne doch war ja noch eine neue Frage.
Okay, one last question and we'll finish the panel.
Or Hamza, you could say something about Sharaka if you like also. So this was not me.
I'm lost. I don't even know what are you talking about.
What's your opinion on Sharaka?
What?
You taking the moderation.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Konstantin. Sorry.
Okay, one last question and we'll finish the talk, okay? Here.
Okay, so first I really want to thank you because I think you both made very important points today. And I wanted to ask you how you both talked about it, about like this leftist movement or leftist and Islamism. And I really wanted to know how do you talk to people who relativieren Islamism, like from the leftist. You said you feel betrayed by these people, but what are your arguments? How do you try to get to a rational point with these people? Because for me this is like a very important question.
As I said, at some point only the police helps with those people. So when you're a Jewish person, I would say, no, don't go and try to open your heart and all of this. This doesn't probably not work. Historically, there's a very bad track record of that for Jewish people. What I do, I actually do a lot of this work. I work within Muslim communities.
But this was more about leftists.
Yeah, but I think at this point it's very similar. I think this is an argument. This is an intellectual argument. This is not some building bridges, but I have an intellectual argument, which is my main point that I try to use. So, two. One, I try to humanize Israelis and Zionists, often in paradoxical ways when talking. So, for example, I emphasize very strongly the effect of anti-Semitism on Jewish communities that it had and which led to the founding of Zionism, which means that I try to humanize Zionism not as an evil demonic movement bent on world domination, but then, for example, Nachman Chaim Bialik's poem In the City of Slaughter, which talks about the horror of a Jew who sees the aftermath of a pogrom in Tsarist Russia. And I say, read about the rapes and murders and the dead children, and then imagine how would you feel as a Jew. Yeah? Would you say next time I'll defend myself, or would you say next time I'll be extra nice? Which also helps to understand Israel for people who have a very negative image of Israel, who see the Instagram and TikTok feed of the dead children from Gaza. You will not tell them Israel is a nice interreligious paradise. They won't believe it. They won't laugh at you. But you can tell them the root of this is not an evil conspiracy. The root, at least, are humans who suffer. This is the first step. The other rational argument I make, I wrote an article about this for the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, is where I criticize the so-called Jerusalem Declaration on anti-Semitism, is when I say all supporters of Palestine need to ask themselves one core question. Am I supporting movements that want to bring about peace between the two sides? Or am I supporting movements that want total victory for the liberation of Palestine. Because most supporters, leftists especially, supporters of Palestine will say, I want liberation of Palestine and then peaceful living together of all the people there. Yeah? But then I say, but the movements you support, what's their core objective? Is it peaceful coexistence or is it the liberation of all of Palestine? If the liberation of all of Palestine is the most important part and the peaceful coexistence is like kind of optional, like with Hamas, I mean, optional is an euphemism, it's too positively said, but that's like the argument, then you're on the wrong path. Go find to support those for whom the peaceful coexistence is the major goal, and whatever they deem under liberation only comes secondary, because when the peaceful coexistence is the major goal, you can talk to anyone. Then peace will be possible. Yeah? Even with people who, doesn't matter what kind of solution they support, one state, two state, whatever, as long as the goal is not to violently destroy the identity, political identity of the other side, everything can be discussed.
Actually, I'd say that the alliance between the extreme left and the Islamists is dangerous not only for the people of Israel or Palestine, but also for the West that opened its door. That doesn't mean that they should close their doors, but at least to be more careful on what they are bringing to their countries. And for the second point, I'd say for me, the first talking point I would always go with is more than 50% of Israel's society are Arab Jews. And those, so we are talking about a fifth of the Israeli society, and those people did not just think of taking a vacation and going to Israel. Those people were kicked off their countries simply for being Jews. And if we are going to talk about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, we should consider that those people don't have a place to go to. That's also the case for the Jews who escaped Europe. And I would also focus on the historical context of this land, because for the Arab society, the historical context or the Jewish existence on this land is overlooked, even by the school books, the university books, or whatever. And as Tom said, to start seeing them as humans, as individuals, not as entities, and bringing more focus on their misery. For example, I didn't even know the term concentration camp until I became like 24. That's how the problem is overlooked in the Arab society.
Hamza, you're of course right. I misunderstood. It's 20% Arab Israelis and about 40% Israelis with background from the Muslim world, Jewish Israelis.
52.
Yes.
I remember.
Yeah, right, exactly, sorry. Of Jews, 50% of Jews in Israel are of Middle Eastern background. Sorry.
All right, I will close it right now. I think thank you again, Tom and Hamza, for joining us on this discussion. Thank you for sharing your opinion. Danke auch an euch, dass ihr noch geduldig geblieben seid zum Schluss. Danke für eure Kommentare und Wortbeiträge, und ich hoffe, meine Versuche, das hier zwischenzeitlich ein wenig zu übersetzen, haben nicht genervt und haben irgendwie funktioniert für jemanden hier. Die nächsten Taz-Talks, die hier stattfinden, finden, wie ich das gerade sehe, überwiegend auf der Frankfurter Buchmesse statt. Aber wir sehen uns hier wieder, wenn es dann demnächst um Asien geht. Wenn euch das gefallen hat, was ihr heute hier gesehen habt, kommt gerne mal vorbei. Der Eintritt ist, soweit ich weiß, üblicherweise frei. Und dort vorne rechts neben der Tür liegen auch noch ein paar Taz-Ausgaben von heute, von dem heutigen Montag, dem 7. Oktober. Diese Ausgabe ist nach allem, was ich weiß, gut gefüllt mit vielen, vielen Texten zum Jahrestag des 7. Oktober. Wer die heute hier vermisste jüdische Perspektive auf diesen Tag, wer diese Perspektive vermisst hat, dem empfehle ich das Essay von meiner Kollegin Dina Riese, die nochmal etwas darüber geschrieben hat, wie es sich anfühlt, als Jüdin in Deutschland diesen Tag zu erleben. Und es sind weitere tolle Texte da drin, auch von meinem Kollegen Nicolas Potter über eine Reportage über das Nova-Festival ein Jahr danach. Und also ein paar Ausgaben liegen da noch rum. Sie ist ab morgen dann nicht mehr aktuell, die Ausgabe. Für heute taugt sie noch sehr gut. Und dann bleibt mir nichts anderes übrig, als mich zu bedanken. Und ich wünsche euch allen einen schönen Abend.